The snow came down slow that year, the kind that does not hurry because it knows it will win in the end. It came white on the black hedges of Lindenshire and white on the slate roofs of Halvermere Hall, and it brought with it the smell that Iris Dunmore had learned to read the way other women read scripture. Wood smoke first. Then wet wool, then, underneath, the cold, clean smell of stone that had not warmed since October. She was the kind of woman a house used all day and forgot by supper. Not pretty enough to be remarked on, not plain enough to be pitied, 20 and 6 years old, with hands roughened from lye and leather both. She had grown up in her father's boot shop 3 streets from the Hall gates, and when the shop failed and her father died within the same hard winter, she had come up to the kitchens, because the Hall took in whoever could work, and asked no questions about the rest. She could mend a harness strap, so the stitch never showed. She could tell by the set of a horse's ear whether it meant to bolt or only meant to complain. These were not accomplishments anyone had ever praised her for. They were only the things she knew. Something was going to happen at Halvermere before the week was out. She did not know its shape yet. She only felt it the way she felt weather coming, in the ache behind her wrist where the cold always found her first. If you have found this story before the fire has gone out where you are sitting, you may as well stay for the rest of it. Consider, before the road ahead gets colder, giving this channel your subscription so the next one finds you as easily as this one did. The gate bell rang twice that evening, which was the signal for beggars, and twice meant they were to be turned away. Lady Cressida Vane had made the rule herself the week she took the running of the house, and she had made it plain that it was not a suggestion. No bread from the kitchen door, no coin. A workhouse token and nothing more, and the token only if the gatekeeper felt generous, which he rarely did in weather like this. Iris heard the second ring from the scullery window, and looked out and saw a boy standing in the drive with no coat. He could not have been more than 8. His feet were wrapped in rags gone the grey of the snow around them. He was not crying. He had the still, waiting look of a child who has learned that crying changes nothing, and only wastes the little warmth he has left. She did not think about the rule. She thought about his feet. She took the heel of the morning loaf, still faintly warm from its cloth, and she took her own shawl off her shoulders, and she went out the scullery door into the yard where the snow came sideways and bit at her face like something with teeth. She knelt down in front of him so they were level, which no one at Halvermere had done for a beggar child in a very long time. "Here," she said. "Eat first. Talk after if you want to." He looked at the bread as if he did not trust it to be real. "It is real," she said. "I made it myself." He took it then, both hands, and ate like something that had forgotten food was a thing that came in more than 1 meal a week. She wrapped the shawl around him while he ate, and did not ask his name yet, because she had learned that a hungry child answers better on a full mouth than an empty one. "Ellery," he said finally. "Just that. Well then, Ellery, you cannot stand in this yard all night. I'm not allowed at the door. You are allowed at mine," she said, "because it is not the front door, and I am the one standing in it." She did not know that a man was watching her from the stable archway across the yard, half in shadow, a lantern down at his side so its light would not give him away. He had arrived at Halvermere 3 days before under a hired name, in a hired coat, to see what his own house had become in the 2 years he had let his cousin run it, while he was elsewhere, burying a father and a betrothal both. He had heard the gate rule read out to the staff on his first evening, delivered in his cousin's light, amused voice, and he had said nothing, because a stable hand does not correct his mistress's mistress. She did not know that he watched her defy that rule for a boy who could never repay her, believing herself entirely unseen, and that he stood very still in the archway for a long moment after, turning something over in his mind the way a man turns a coin to see both its faces. She did not know, that first snowing night, that the hall was going to learn something about her by morning, one way or another, and that the man in the archway had already begun deciding what to do about it. She took Ellery to the hayloft above the stable, where it was dry if not warm, and she told the head groom, a kind, tired man named Whitlow, that the boy was to sleep there, and that if Lady Cressida asked, Whitlow had found him, not her. Whitlow only grunted, which from Whitlow was agreement. She did not go back inside to be thanked. There was no one to thank her. That was rather the point. She did not know, either, that the stable hand called Gid had already resolved to see that the boy had a blanket by morning that was thicker than the one she had left him, and that he would arrange it in such a way that no one could say where it came from. Mrs. Fenimore found Iris scrubbing pots long after the rest of the kitchen had gone dark and cold, and stood in the doorway with her arms folded the way she did when she already knew the answer to the question she was about to ask. "You gave that boy your good shawl." "It was my only shawl," Iris said. "So it was also my worst." Mrs. Fenimore did not smile exactly, but something in her face loosened. "Her ladyship will have your position if she learns of it." "Then I expect I will need a new position," Iris said, and went on scrubbing, because there was nothing else useful to say, and because she had already decided that a warm boy was worth a cold position, and did not think the decision required defending. She did not ask Mrs. Fenimore to keep it quiet. She did not think of herself as having done anything that needed hiding. That, too, was rather the point, though she would not have called it a point at all. She would only have called it Tuesday. The house did not learn of it that week, not from any mouth that mattered. But something in the house had already begun to shift, quietly, the way ice shifts before it cracks, in a room no one else was standing in. Gideon Vane, 6th Duke of Halvermere, had come home to his own estate wearing another man's coat because he no longer trusted the letters his steward sent him in London. The figures balanced too neatly. The tenants' complaints, when they reached him at all, arrived softened, as if strained through cloth, and his cousin Cressida had written him 3 times in 6 months to say that all was very well, in a hand so light and pleasant that he had learned, from long acquaintance with her, to read it as a warning. So he had come in the dead of winter, under the name Gid, hired on as a stable hand because a duke moving through his own yard invisible learns in a week, what a duke arriving with outriders and trumpets would never learn in a year. He mucked stalls, he mended tack, he listened, because men do not guard their tongues in front of a stable hand the way they guard them in front of a duke. What he had not expected to find, on his 3rd night, was a scullery maid kneeling in the snow to feed a beggar child bread she could not spare, under a rule she had every reason to fear, believing no one of any consequence would ever know. He had been betrothed once to a woman named Seraphina Locke, whose face in company was soft as a psalm, and whose hand once. He had seen strike a housemaid for spilling wax on a rug. She had wept prettily when he broke it off. She had wept prettily at nearly everything. He had come to distrust prettiness in tears the way other men distrust a coin that rings wrong. He did not distrust the girl in the yard. She had not wept at all. She had simply knelt down and done the thing that needed doing, and asked no one to watch her do it. He told himself he was only gathering information, the way a steward gathers figures. He told himself this for 3 more days, and each day it grew a little harder to believe. He arranged, without his own name attached to it, for the boy Ellery to have a proper blanket and a place at the stable's own meagre table. He told Whitlow it had come from a fund the estate kept for such things, which was a fund that did not exist until he invented it that same afternoon out of his own purse. When Whitlow asked who to thank, Gid said only that the money did not care to be thanked, and Whitlow, who had worked for gentlemen his whole life, and had learned to recognise one even in stable clothes, said nothing more, but looked at him a moment longer than was strictly needed. Iris did not know any of this. She only noticed, over the following days, that the boy did not seem quite as cold as she had feared he would be, and she was glad of it, and did not think to ask why, because good fortune for a beggar child was not the sort of thing she had learned to interrogate. She had learned, instead, simply to be grateful when it came, and to go on with her work. The new stable hand, she noticed, was quieter than the others. He did not join the groom's evening talk in the yard. He watched more than he spoke, and when he did speak it was short and plain, without the coarse joking the other men favoured. She thought him odd. She did not think him anything more than odd, because she had no reason yet to think otherwise, and because a duke in a borrowed coat, mucking a stall by lantern light, looks very much like exactly what he is pretending to be. She did not know, that week, how closely she was being watched, or how carefully, or by whom. She only knew that the cold had not killed anyone yet, and that for now, that was enough to be grateful for. The frost held hard through the second week of the new year, and it was in that cold that Iris and the stable hand called Gid first spoke to each other directly. Over a mare with a split hoof that Whitlow did not have the patience for. "You've a way with her," he said, watching Iris run her hand slow along the mare's neck until the animal's ears came forward instead of back. "She isn't cross," Iris said. "She's frightened. Most creatures that seem cross are only frightened and haven't the words to say so." "Most people too," he said. She glanced at him then, surprised he had said anything at all worth remembering, and found him watching the horse rather than her, which she took as a kind of courtesy, though she could not have said why. They worked together binding the hoof, her hands quick and sure, his careful and slower learning. He asked her once where she had learned it, and she told him about her father's boot shop, about leather and stitching and the particular give of good hide under a needle, and about the winter it had all gone to nothing at once. She did not tell it as a sad story. She told it the way she told most things, plain without asking for pity, and he found himself listening for what she left out as much as for what she said. "You did not ask for help then," he said. "The winter your father died. There was no one to ask," she said. "And I would not have known how, even if there had been. Asking is a kind of skill too. I never learned it." "That is not a virtue," he said, quiet. "No," she agreed. "It is only what happened to me. Virtue is a different thing. Virtue is what you do with what happened to you, not the happening itself." He did not answer that at once. He looked at her the way a man looks at a ledger that has finally been made to balance after weeks of trying, as though something in him had settled into a column it fit. "You saw the boy," she said suddenly, not a question exactly, more a testing of ground. "That first night. In the yard. His hands went still on the mare's leg for the length of one breath. I saw a lot of things that night. You might have told someone. Her ladyship does not care for beggars fed at her gate. I am not in the habit of telling her ladyship things," he said, "that are none of her business." It was as close to warmth as he had come with anyone at Halvermere since his arrival, and she felt it land somewhere under her ribs, though she could not have named the feeling if pressed. She only knew that she did not mind, after that, when he fell into step beside her on the walk back from the paddock, and that the mare's hoof healed clean within a fortnight, and that she found herself, without deciding to, listening for the particular sound of his boots in the yard before she let herself feel it was him. He had not meant to tell her as much as he had. He told himself, walking back to the stable that night, that a man playing at being a stable hand ought not to speak so freely of virtue and asking, and what a person owes to their own history. It was the kind of talk that gave a disguise away. And yet he had wanted, badly, for her to understand that he had seen what she did in the snow, and had not thought less of her for the risk of it. He had wanted her to know it without having to say plainly that he knew. It was, he realized later, the first time in 2 years he had wanted anything at all beyond getting through the day. He began, after that, to arrange small things. A rent forgiven for a widow 3 farms out, done through the steward's office with instructions that the tenant never learn who had ordered it. A doctor sent for old Tobit, the thresher's wife, paid from a purse that Whitlow again could not trace to any name. Each time, when asked, he said only that it had not come from him, which was, in the strictest sense, a lie, and in every sense that mattered to him, the truth, because he did not want it to come from him. He wanted it to come from no one, the way good weather comes from no one, simply because it was needed. Iris noticed none of it directly. She only noticed that the estate seemed, that winter, to be quietly kinder than its mistress, and she thought it strange, and did not think to ask why, because kindness with no name attached does not invite investigation. It only invites gratitude, offered up into the air to whoever might be listening. She did not know that the man she thought a stable hand was listening, very closely, and keeping a private accounting that had nothing to do with figures, and everything to do with her. Lady Cressida Vane held her midwinter dinner on the last Friday of January, as she did every year, with the neighbouring gentry seated at her table, and the staff arranged to serve them in a silence she found becoming. She had run Halvermere for 2 years in her cousin's absence, with a light hand in company and a hard one in private, and she wore both so well that few of her guests had ever seen the second. She had a laugh that came in 3 notes, always 3, precise as a bell struck by someone counting, and she used it that evening when the soup was set before her, and she found, floating in it, a single thread of grey wool. "Whose work is this?" she said, holding the laugh just under her voice like a blade held flat. The scullery had sent the soup up short of hands that night, and it was Iris who had carried the last tureen, and it was Iris who stood nearest when the question was asked, and so it was Iris who answered, because the alternative was letting some other maid answer for a fault that was not hers either. "Mine, my lady, if the fault is mine to own. I'll see it does not happen again." "You will see nothing," Cressida said, and let the 3 notes of her laugh out at last, bright and cold as the frost on the windows. "Look at her hands, everyone, red as a butcher's. I do wonder that the kitchen keeps her at all, when a woman with hands like that can hardly be trusted near good linen, let alone good soup." The table laughed, some of it kindly enough, most of it merely because laughing was easier than not. Iris felt her face go hot, and then, deliberately, made herself feel nothing at all. The way she had taught herself to do since her father's death, when there had been no one left to cry in front of, who would not also have to go on being brave the next morning. She did not cry. She had trained herself long ago not to cry where it showed. "I'll bring a clean tureen directly, my lady," she said, and her voice did not shake, though her hands, carrying the ruined soup back to the kitchen, shook a great deal once no one could see them. It was Gid, waiting by the kitchen door with an armful of wood he had no true reason to be carrying that far into the house, who saw her hands shaking and said nothing about it, only took the tureen from her without being asked, and carried it the rest of the way himself, so that her arms could rest a moment before she had to go back in. "You did not have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I did not have to do a great many things I have done this winter." She looked at him, something in his tone catching at her, but he had already turned back toward the woodpile, and she let it go, because there was soup to remake and a dinner still to serve, and no time that night for wondering about a stable hand's riddles. Later, much later, after the guests had gone and the last candle in the good rooms had been snuffed, Cressida found Gid in the passage outside the dining room, still in his stable coat, and looked him over with the particular contempt she reserved for staff who forgot their place. "You carried a tureen tonight," she said. "That is not stable work." "No, my lady," he said. "Then why did you do it?" He met her eyes, which he understood even then was a small risk, a stable hand's eyes meeting his mistress's cousin's for a beat longer than was proper. "Because her arms were tired, and mine were not," he said, "and I did not see the harm in it." Cressida's mouth thinned. "You are new here. I would think carefully, if I were you, about which servants you choose to be seen defending. I was not aware I had chosen anyone," he said. "I was only carrying soup." She let him go, with nothing more than a cold look, but the exchange stayed with her, the way a splinter stays under skin long after the hand that carries it has stopped noticing the ache, until the day it festers and has to be dug out. It was not one thing that ended it, in the end, but a small accumulation, the way frost does not break a pipe all at once, but only after enough nights of the same cold-pressing in the same place. Cressida had never liked the scullery maid with the red hands and the plain answers, but she came to dislike her a good deal more, once she noticed the new stable hand seeking her out, carrying her burdens, standing a half-step nearer than a hired man ought to stand near anyone. She did not know what he was. She only knew that whatever it was, it did not sit well with her. And she resolved, in the particular way of people who have never had to earn anything for themselves, that she would end it before it became a thing worth ending. The excuse arrived on its own, as excuses generally do to those determined to find one. A silver spoon went missing from the good service, and Cressida did not trouble herself with proof before she named the missing girl in front of the assembled staff. "She has been seen taking bread that was not hers to take," Cressida said, meaning the beggar child, though she did not name him, letting the accusation curl wide enough to catch whatever it could. "I think we may guess where the spoon has gone." "I have never touched the silver, my lady," Iris said. "You may search my room. You may search me." "I have no intention of dirtying my hands searching a scullery maid," Cressida said. "I intend only to dismiss one. You will be gone from Halvermere by morning, and the boy with you. I will not have thieves get sleeping in my stable." Ellery was not the thief. Iris was not the thief. The spoon, in fact, would turn up 3 days later behind a cupboard where it had slid unnoticed, but by then it would not matter, because dismissal at Halvermere did not wait on proof. It only waited on Lady Cressida's convenience. Iris did not weep in front of her. She stood very straight and said, "As you wish, my lady," and turned and walked back to the scullery with her spine like a rod of iron. And it was only once the door was shut behind her that her hands began, again, to shake. Gid heard of it within the hour, from Whitlow, who came to the stable grey-faced and furious in his quiet way. Gid stood very still when he heard it, the same stillness Iris had noticed weeks before over the mare's split hoof, and something moved behind his eyes that Whitlow, watching, could not read. "She's done nothing," Whitlow said. "You know that. I know that. Everyone below stairs knows it. I know it," Gid said. "Then, what will you do?" He did not answer that directly. He only said, "Tell no one what I am about to do next," and went into the house by the servants' passage with a stillness in his step that Whitlow would later say made the hair rise on his arms, though he could not have explained why. At the time, a stable hand's calm should have frightened him at all. Iris packed what little she owned into a single bag that night, folding her father's account book in with her second dress and the small clay dog Ellery had made her from garden mud as thanks she had tried, and failed to refuse. She woke Ellery gently in the loft and told him they would leave together before first light, that she would find work somewhere else, that it would be all right, though she did not entirely believe it herself, and had simply decided that a child needed to hear it whether or not it was true yet. She did not go to find Gid to say goodbye. She told herself there was no reason to. A stable hand was not owed farewells from a dismissed maid, and she reminded herself firmly, no claim on him at all beyond a few conversations over a horse's hoof and a carried tureen. She told herself this several times, which was, she would later admit, a fairly reliable sign that she did not believe it. She sat instead in the cold scullery, long after the rest of the house had gone dark, with her bag at her feet and Ellery asleep against her shoulder, and waited for a dawn she was not looking forward to, and did not let herself cry, because crying, she had long ago decided, was a luxury for people with somewhere warm to do it in. It was Mrs. Fenimore who found her there an hour before the coach was due, and who did not say a word of comfort, because she had never been a woman for comfort, but who sat down heavily across the table and said, "Before you go, girl, you had better know what you are leaving." "I know what I am leaving," Iris said. "A position and a roof." "You know less than you think, Mrs., Fenimore said, and folded her hands on the table the way she did when she meant to say something she had been holding a long while. "That widow 3 farms out. Her rent forgiven this quarter, out of nowhere, no name given. Old Tobit's wife, with the doctor sent for her, paid out of a purse nobody in this house can trace. That boy's blanket, the extra grain that appeared in the stable stores the week after you fed him. You did not think to ask where any of it came from. I assumed it was a state charity. There is no estate charity fund, Mrs. Fenimore said. There never was, until this winter. I have kept these books 11 years. I would know." Iris felt something shift under her, slow, the way ice shifts before it gives. Then who? Mrs. Fenimore looked at her for a long moment, weighing, Iris understood later, whether it was hers to tell. "I have my suspicions," she said at last, carefully, "and I will say only this. The person doing it does not want to be thanked. He has made that very clear to everyone who has come close to guessing. But I do not think, girl, that a man goes to such trouble to stay unnamed unless the not being thanked matters to him more than most men's pride matters to them." "You think it is Gid," Iris said, and heard how strange the name sounded, said aloud, attached to such a weight of unexplained kindness. Mrs. Fenimore did not answer that directly either. She only said, "I think you had better not get on that coach without hearing what he has to say for himself," and rose, and left Iris sitting with her bag at her feet, and the first grey edge of dawn coming up cold and clean through the scullery window, and a great deal, suddenly, that she did not understand and very much wanted to. She did not get on the coach. She found him in the small estate office off the stable yard, a room she had never once seen him in before that morning, and the first thing she understood, stepping through the door, was that it did not look like a room a stable hand had any business standing in. There was a fire already lit, banked warm, and papers on the desk in a hand she recognised from the rent notices that had gone round the tenant farms for 2 years bearing a signature she had never troubled to read closely. He stood when she entered. He did not sit back down. "You are not a stable hand," she said. "No," he said. "I have not been for a very long time, though I have tried this winter to be one honestly, for as many hours a day as I could manage it." "Then what are you?" "Gideon Vane," he said. "Duke of Halvermere. This is my house. That is my cousin's cruelty you have been living under, and it is mine to answer for. Because I let her run it unwatched for 2 years and told myself that was mercy, when it was only cowardice wearing mercy's coat." She did not sit down either. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were not shaking now. They had gone very still, the way they did when a task in front of her required all of her at once. "Why?" she said. "Why any of it? The disguise, the stable." "Because I no longer trust what people show a duke," he said. "My steward's letters said all was well. My cousin's letters said all was well. I came to see for myself what all was well actually looked like, from the yard, where no one dresses it up for my benefit." He paused. "And on my 3rd night here, I stood in that archway and watched a scullery maid give a beggar child her own bread and her own shawl, in the snow, believing herself entirely unwatched, expecting nothing from it, not even his thanks. Anyone would have done it. "No," he said, "they would not. I have owned this house 2 years, and it took a stranger in the snow to feed that boy before you did it. I wanted to see who you were when you believed no one of consequence was watching. That is the only test I have ever found that tells the truth about a person. Everyone is generous when they are seen. You were generous when you thought you were not. You let me think you were a poor man. I let you treat me as one," he said, "and you gave me the seat by your fire when I had nothing to offer you for it. You have no notion, I think, what that meant, coming as it did from someone with no reason to spare me any warmth at all. You could have told me sooner." "I could have," he agreed. "I did not, because I was afraid, once you knew, that everything true between us would become something else. Something owed, something performed. I have had enough of performed kindness to last several lifetimes." His jaw tightened, briefly, at whatever memory that touched. "I did not want your kindness to become a duty the moment you learned who received it. That was not fair to me," she said, plain, because she had promised herself long ago never to soften the truth to spare a listener, duke or otherwise. "No," he said. "It was not. I am telling you so myself, because I would rather you hear it as a confession than guess it as a wound. I am sorry for the lie, Iris. I am not sorry for what I learned from it." It was the first time he had used her given name. It landed somewhere she had not braced for. "My cousin dismissed you, and the boy both, this morning, on no evidence at all," he went on. "That order is undone, as of this hour, and will not be renewed while I own this house. But I will not ask you to stay for my sake, or to think kindly of me because of anything I have arranged behind your back this winter. I will ask you nothing tonight. I only wanted you to know, before you decided anything at all, exactly who had been standing beside you in that stable yard, and why. And if I choose to go anyway," she said, "the coach, the position elsewhere, then I will see you and the boy safely settled wherever you choose to go," he said. and I will not trouble you again unless you write first. I would rather have your no, honestly given, than a yes you felt too cornered to refuse. She stood a long while in the warm little room, the fire ticking softly in the grate, and thought of the seat by her own hearth that she had offered him without a second thought, and of how strange it was that the largest thing in her life should turn, in the end, on so small an act. "I am not deciding tonight," she said finally. "I did not ask you to," he said, and something in his face, some readiness for refusal he had clearly been carrying since he walked into that room, eased, just slightly, at her answer. She did not decide that night. She decided 3 days later, after Cressida Vane had been sent from Halvermere with a coldness her cousin had never before shown her, and a letter of introduction to no one at all, and after Ellery had been given a proper room and the promise of a schoolmaster come spring, and after Mrs. Fenimore had told her, dryly, that she had never in 11 years seen his Grace so undone by so small a woman. She found Gideon in the stable-yard, in his own clothes now, which suited him less easily than the borrowed coat had, as though he had grown accustomed to being plain, and found rank an ill-fitting garment by comparison. "You have had your 3 days," he said. "I have." "And? I want to be spoken to plainly," she said. "Always not managed. Not softened. If you are ever ashamed of a thing you have done, you will tell me yourself, and not let me learn it from a housekeeper over cold soup." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation, "and I will not be a duchess who forgets what a beggar's feet feel like in the snow. That does not change whatever I am called." "I would not have you any other way," he said. "It is the only way I have ever wanted you." She held out her bare hand then, red-knuckled, unadorned, the hand he had first admired over a frightened mare's neck, and he took his glove off finger by finger, slow, deliberate, as though the small ritual of it mattered to him as much as anything he might say after, and closed his bare hand around hers. "Yes," she said. It was the only word she needed, and she found she did not need to dress it in anything more. "Thank you," he said, "for the seat by the fire. Thank you," she said, "for the blanket you never let me trace to you." They stood a moment in the cold yard, each thanking the other for the opposite kindness, and somewhere above them a rook called once from the stable roof, and was still. The wedding, when it came in early spring, was a small thing by the standards of a duke's household, and a very large thing by the standards of everyone who had ever known Iris Dunmore as the red-handed girl from the failed boot shop. She wore no jewels she had not chosen herself, and she asked that the church doors be left open, so that anyone from the village who wished to stand at the back might do so. Which was not, Mrs. Fenimore observed dryly, the custom, though no one thought to argue with the new Duchess about it twice. Cressida Vane did not attend. She had gone to live with a distant aunt in a quieter county, and her letters, when they came at all, went unread into the fire, not out of cruelty, Iris said once, but because some doors did not need to be reopened to prove they had once been shut for a reason. Ellery grew that year the way boys grow, when they are finally warm enough and fed enough to spend their strength on growing instead of surviving. He kept the small clay dog on his own window-sill long after he had outgrown the need to make such things with his hands, and when he was asked, years later, why he kept it, he said only that it reminded him of the first night anyone had ever knelt down to his level in the snow. Old Whitlow stayed on as head groom until his hands grew too stiff for the work, and was given, without his asking, a cottage of his own on the estate, and a pension that arrived every quarter with no note attached, because some habits, once learned, are hard for a man to give up entirely. A year to the night from the evening Iris had first knelt in the snow with a heel of bread, she sat by the fire in her own hall, in the same low-rush-seated chair she had once offered a stranger with nothing to give her in return, and her husband came in from the cold, with the particular quiet step she had learned, that winter, to listen for without meaning to. He did not ask leave to sit. He simply drew the second chair close to hers, the way he had every night since, and took her bare hand in his, and their fingers laced together and did not let go. Outside the snow came down slow, the way it always does when it means to stay, and somewhere a rook called once and was answered by nothing at all. Because it did not need answering. A house may be judged, in the end, by nothing grander than this, whether it is kind to those who can do nothing for it, and whether the people who run it are the same in the dark as they are by daylight. If this story kept you close to your own fire tonight, stay a while longer with this channel, because there is always another quiet kindness waiting to be told. Subscribing costs you nothing, and it is exactly the sort of small, unlooked-for thing this story has been about all along. I would love to know, in the comments below, what you think Iris felt in that first moment she realised who had truly been sitting beside her in that stable yard. Rest well tonight, and I will be back soon with another story, waiting for you by the fire.